Back in 2008, I was 16 and thought I was invincible. That night, though, taught me how quickly invincible can turn into terrified. It was late August, muggy and silent outside, and my parents had driven an hour away for a wedding reception, leaving me with the house, the dog, who was thankfully boarded, and a six-pack of Mountain Dew. I was in the basement, my sanctuary, playing Gears of War with my headset on, volume cranked. Around 1:30 a.m., I paused the game. I felt that sudden, unsettling clarity you get when you realize you haven't moved in hours and need a refill. As I climbed the carpeted stairs from the basement to the main floor, I took my headphones off. The silence that rushed in wasn't the good, peaceful kind. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of an empty house at 2 in the morning. I was about halfway up the final flight, moving toward the kitchen, when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. Thump. It was soft, but incredibly distinct, like a sock full of sand hitting the wooden floor. It came from the landing right outside my parents' bedroom, where I knew there was nothing that should be moving. I froze, flashlight mode immediately engaging in my mind. House settling. Wind. I whispered the rationalizations, but the air around me felt cold. Then came the second sound, a slow, measured dragging, like heavy fabric being pulled across the old hallway carpet. Shh, shh, shh. It was moving toward the central staircase. My stomach dropped to my knees. I crept up the last 3 steps and ducked behind the corner of the living room wall, peeking into the dimly lit hallway. The only illumination was the weak amber glow from the street lamp filtering through the front window. It cast long, dancing shadows of the tree branches onto the white walls. The dragging noise stopped directly over the middle of the stairs, about 15 feet away. I could see nothing. I stood there, flashlight in hand, breath held tight in my chest. Then, I saw the movement. It wasn't a shadow of the trees, it was a shape. Perfectly still, utterly silent, and impossibly tall and thin, standing right at the top of the stairs where the landing began. It was a block of absolute, flawless black that absorbed all light. It had the outline of a person, but distorted, stretched like a funhouse mirror reflection made of pure void. It was facing me. I couldn't scream. My throat had sealed itself shut. I stood paralyzed, teenage invincibility draining away into raw, childlike terror. The dark shape didn't move an inch, but I could feel its focus, a cold, intense scrutiny from a place that wasn't supposed to exist. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour, me frozen, the black figure motionless, until the distant mechanical clatter of a snowplow started up down the street. The noise, mundane and real, shattered the unnatural stillness. In that instant, the tall black shape was gone. The space at the top of the stairs was empty, the floorboards were silent. I didn't investigate, I didn't turn on a light. I simply backed away, stumbled down the basement stairs, slammed the door, and spent the remaining 2 hours before my parents got home, sitting on the cold concrete floor, my aluminum mag light clutched like a talisman. I kept the basement lights on, listening to the house settle, and resolved to never, ever be home alone after midnight again.
This happened 2 years ago, sometime around the middle of January. My name is Anna, and my husband, Mark, was on a business trip in Seattle, which meant I was alone in our old, rambling house for 4 nights. I usually don't mind the quiet, but January in New England is heavy and dark, and the house always seems to hold its breath once the sun sets at 4:30 p.m. On the 3rd night, I was upstairs scrolling through my tablet, bundled under a heavy blanket. The TV was on for background noise, but around 10:45 p.m., I started feeling strangely restless. I got up to close the bedroom door, something I always leave open when Mark is home, and that's when I heard it. Click. It was the sound of the back door, the one leading from the kitchen to the mudroom, being quietly, perfectly locked. I knew it was locked because I had double-checked it myself after getting home from work, testing the handle until the mechanism clicked securely into place. This was the sound of a second lock engaging, but we only have one lock on that door. I turned the TV volume down, straining to listen over the wind rattling the old window panes. Nothing. Just the house settling, the furnace ticking, the usual noises. I told myself I was tired, my mind was playing tricks, and I was just hearing the echo of the refrigerator compressor starting up. I climbed back into bed, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. About 20 minutes passed before the next sound, and this one was impossible to rationalize. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm of 3 taps coming from the ceiling directly above the headboard. Tap, 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 then a long pause, then again. Tap, tap, tap. I bolted upright, throwing the blanket off. We have a small, completely empty attic above our bedroom, accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hall. It's an insulated space, dusty and tight. Absolutely no one could be up there. I snatched my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to call Mark, but my nerves were shot. I decided to check the attic access first. I crept into the hallway, grabbed the wooden dowel used to pull down the ladder, and stared up at the sealed square in the ceiling. As I hesitated, a new sound came. It wasn't from the ceiling anymore. It was from behind me. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the wall of the linen closet, just 4 feet away, and it was loud. The taps sounded like they were made with a hard fingernail on plasterboard. It was directly adjacent to where I was standing, and I could feel the microscopic vibration through the floor. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. All the adrenaline coalesced into a single, blinding need for light. I slammed my hand against the hall switch, flooding the space with bright white light. The taps stopped instantly. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy, dark quiet from before. It was an absence, a sudden, terrifying vacuum where noise should have been. I stood there, shaking, until I could hear my own ragged breath again. I didn't open the attic, and I didn't go back into my bedroom. I went downstairs, sat on the sofa with a butcher knife on the coffee table, and waited for the first sliver of weak January light to appear in the eastern sky. When Mark got home, he looked at the back door. There was a fresh, deep scratch beside the handle, as if someone had tried to wedge something sharp into the deadbolt slot. And beneath the scratch, someone had written a single perfect character into the wood with a sharp object, the letter A. March 3rd, 2014. I remember it like yesterday. The weather was a raw, miserable mix of sleet and freezing rain, and I had the house to myself while my roommate was out of town. We lived in a slightly isolated area, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business, which usually felt peaceful, but tonight it felt like a liability. I was in the living room, reading, when I heard the first sound, a faint, almost metallic scrape from the deck around the back. I paused, holding my breath, telling myself it was a tree branch or maybe an animal. The rain and wind were loud enough to mask anything small. I stood up and crept to the kitchen window, peering out at the murky blackness. The motion sensor light over the garage hadn't triggered, which was odd if it were an animal. I saw nothing, just the sleet slashing diagonally through the weak porch light. Then, the sound came again. Louder this time. It was a firm, repeated levering noise, like someone was applying steady, brutal force to something wooden. It was coming from the mudroom door, which was tucked behind the garage and hidden from the street. My heart immediately went into overdrive. This wasn't the wind. This was someone deliberately trying to get inside. I snatched my phone off the counter, darted into the pantry, the safest, most internal room in the house, and locked the flimsy door behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone as I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is breaking into my house, I whispered, pressing myself against the far wall, trying to control the ragged panic in my voice. The back door. I can hear them trying to pry it open. I'm alone. Please, I'm at 1412 Juniper Road. The dispatcher, a calm and steady woman, immediately began collecting information and assuring me that units were being sent. As I spoke, the levering stopped, replaced by a terrifying heavy thud and the sickening sound of wood splintering. They were in the mudroom. I hear footsteps, them moving towards the kitchen. I choked out. The dispatcher instructed me to stay quiet, stay hidden, and not to hang up. I could hear the footsteps, two distinct heavy treads moving slowly through the kitchen. The kitchen cabinets groaned faintly as someone tried a handle. Then, one of them said something low and guttural that I couldn't make out, followed by a harsh shh. They knew I was there, or at least that someone might be. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the dispatcher's steady breathing as my entire world was reduced to the sound of those approaching feet. The footsteps reached the living room, right outside the pantry. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying the old hinges wouldn't creak. Then, through the pantry walls, I heard something else. A siren. Faint at first, then rapidly growing louder and closer. It didn't sound like just one car. The dispatcher said, "Ma'am, the officers are arriving on scene. Keep listening for me." The siren seemed to blast through the house. The footsteps in the living room froze, then erupted into a frantic, chaotic sprint. There was the sound of a window crashing, followed by shouted commands and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the frozen ground outside. A minute later, a firm male voice called out from the living room, "Police, is anyone inside? Come out with your hands visible." Tears of pure, overwhelming relief streamed down my face. I unlocked the pantry door, stepped out into the blinding flashlight beams, and saw the glorious sight of two uniformed officers standing in my living room. While outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of arrests being made over the sounds of the sleet. My creepy encounter happened back in 2011. I was living in a cheap, slightly run-down ground-floor apartment complex while finishing college. My boyfriend, Sam, was visiting family in a state away, so I had the whole small, vulnerable space to myself. It was just after 1 a.m., and I was curled up on the sofa, trying to focus on a documentary about space. But the silence of the rest of the building was profound. I had a nagging sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The window next to the sofa was old, and its exterior screen was slightly warped, making it rattle in strong wind. But tonight, the air was dead calm. Around 1:30 a.m., I muted the TV because I thought I heard a noise. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. A rhythmic, delicate tapping coming from right outside that window, a mere 3 feet from my head. It wasn't on the glass, but on the flimsy aluminum frame of the screen. It sounded like someone was lightly pressing a set of long, hard fingernails against the mesh, slowly, testing the tension. I froze, heart accelerating, and whispered a desperate rationalization. "Wind. It's just the wind." But the branches outside were still. I turned the TV volume up to maximum, but 5 minutes later, I couldn't stand the suspense and paused it again. The tapping was back, more confident this time, and now punctuated by a faint, wet hissing noise, almost like someone trying to spit or breathe shallowly without making a sound. The proximity was terrifying. The screen was being fiddled with. The rhythmic tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a careful prying sound, like the aluminum frame was being gently pulled away from the sill at the bottom right corner. Whoever it was, they were trying to gain access without breaking the glass. I didn't move for what felt like 10 minutes. My eyes were fixed on the window's reflective surface. The light from the living room made it impossible to see out, but I knew the source of the noise was within inches of my head. I slowly reached for a heavy, decorative metal lantern on the coffee table, my muscles screaming with tension. Then the low prying stopped. A new sound started, a quiet, deliberate scratch. It sounded like rough paper being dragged across the screen's mesh, moving slowly from left to right, then back again, right in front of the window. It felt like someone was drawing a pattern, confirming that the person outside was not only still there, but was enjoying the game. Gathering every ounce of panicked courage, I lunged toward the window and slammed the metal lantern onto the glass with a terrifying, reverberating clang. The scratching stopped instantly. Silence. Absolute, agonizing silence. I stood there gasping, waiting for the sound of running feet or a scream. Nothing. After about 5 minutes, I forced myself to walk over, flicked the window blind open, and looked out. Nothing. The small patch of grass outside was undisturbed, damp, and dark. I stayed awake until the first light of dawn. As soon as the sun hit the grass, I went outside to inspect. The screen was clearly bent outward at the bottom right corner, where the prying sound had been. But the truly chilling part was what I found etched into the thin layer of morning condensation on the exterior glass just above the sill. A single, rough, childish drawing of a large, staring eye looking directly inward, drawn low, where someone would have to be crouching in the dark.